Senator Christopher Murphy, thank you so much for being at the table with us. So much ground to cover. We are in a country right now where at this taping there's a travel warning, and we're leading up to Thanksgiving. So much terrorism going on around the world. I know you just attended a conference in Halifax. Are we ready as a country for what may be coming down the bend? Do we know?
Well, here you start with the premise that we don't know what's coming down the bend. I think I can say with confidence that we're as ready as we can be. You know, this country has a better ability to track who's coming in, to track them once they're here if we think they pose a danger to us than any other country in the world. And so if any country is going to be ready to protect ourselves, it'll be the United States. But at the same time, this is a moment for us to, think twice about the level of screening that we provide for individuals who are coming to the United States, and to really think hard about how we can take the fight to this terrorist group in the Middle East that threatens us and all of our allies. We need to beat these guys. We need to beat them as soon as possible. And ultimately, that's the route to keeping us safe, is to eliminating these guys at the source.
Do you think we had the right kind of intelligence? Did we underestimate how brutal ISIL, ISIS, whatever you want to call them, how brutal they are?
Well, I think we're learning as we speak about how they coordinated and planned this attack in Paris. There is a definite concern that they have found the means to communicate on what's called the dark internet, the portion of the internet that is very hard for law enforcement to find and track. And so we are going to have to keep up with the new means that these organizations have to talk to each other. But here in the United States, we have tools and techniques, most of them are classified, to track these guys and find these guys that other countries don't have. In fact, that other countries have been reluctant to use. Maybe that will change. I mean, you can never say with 100% certainty, in part because sometimes these attacks are almost spontaneous. The Paris one wasn't, but sometimes these are individuals who just are inspired or motivated by this message of hate, and they're difficult to find until the moment of attack.
Now, and you and I talked about this before we went to taping, the police chief in Washington, D.C. says, when we're up against these mass shooters or ISIS, whatever you have, like they did in Paris, you should run or hide or attack if you can and try to take the shooters down. What kind of a world are we living in right now where these kind of messages are getting out there to try to keep you safe? I don't know that I would want to try to take somebody down.
No, and I think it's an unfortunate message in the sense that it suggests that the way in which we should protect ourselves is to all become heavily armed. And I don't want this country to be locked down in fear. The reality is that we have remained free from any large-scale terrorist attack in this country since September 11th because of the great work that our law enforcement has done, that the FBI has done, and other agencies to find these guys before they get to us. And I think we should have some measure of faith that those mechanisms will still work to keep us safe. And so the answer is not for everybody to take the responsibility onto themselves to try to protect themselves. This is still a country that has the resources to protect ourselves, and it's up to us in Congress to make sure that we provide some new techniques and some new tools to add to that capacity.
All right, let's talk about this loophole in the federal law that says a convicted felon cannot get a gun, but there are terrorists that can. Can you describe what this loophole is and why we can't close it like yesterday?
I wish it was more complicated than that, but it's not. So here's what we have. We have a terrorist watch list that you can get on without having committed a crime, right? So if we get intelligence about you that suggests that you've been linking in to certain extremist websites, that's not a crime, but it does put you on the terrorist watch list. Right now, if you're on the terrorist watch list, you are not prohibited from buying a gun. You're prohibited from buying a gun if you've been deemed mentally incapable or you've committed a crime, but not if you're on the terrorist watch list. You can't fly, buy, but you can buy a gun.
Crazy,
it's crazy, right? So why can't the United States Senate tomorrow pass a law that just adds those people to the list?
Why can't they?
So I wish the answer weren't this, but the answer is the gun lobby. The gun lobby is obsessive about no one else being added to this list, and so unfortunately, the NRA has opposed this provision, and I can't explain to you why, but they do. Hopefully, in the wake of Paris, there will be a reassessment of certain members of the Senate who have traditionally stuck to the gun lobby's position. We should be able to do this in a heartbeat. Get this done before Christmas, when we get back from Thanksgiving break. This is insanity.
People come down on both sides of the gun issue. It's a hot button topic.
Sure.
You talk a lot about mental health.
Yeah.
You talk about, and I would argue that we give that a lot of lip service, but it's the first place that we cut in
Right.
mental health.
Right.
How do we get a hold of that and start helping folks with mental health issues? And can you speak to your family?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing to say is the mental health system is broken for everybody. It's not working. And some people want to frame fixing the mental health system as a solution to gun violence. I think that's a mistake. I also think it's a mistake to try to suggest that it won't have a beneficial effect on gun violence. I mean, the story of Adam Lanza is a story about a kid who was very ill-served by the mental health system. Now, he also shouldn't have had access to the weapons that he had access to, but he also didn't get the services that he needs. So we should fix the mental health system because it's broken for everybody, and we should admit that it may have a downward effect. It will have a downward effect on gun violence. I'm hopeful that this is one of those issues that can bring Republicans and Democrats together. So I am the chief proponent of mental health reform in the Senate. I've introduced a big bipartisan bill. We now have 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats on a bill to put more resources into the mental health system, to bring the mental health system together with the physical health system. And it is a personal issue for me, but you know what? It's a personal issue for every member of the Senate, because there isn't a single member, Republican or Democrat, who doesn't have a family member who is touched by mental illness. And so this is something that ultimately I think can pass, in big part because it's personal.
Do you talk a lot about why it is personal to you?
Well, you know, my family has had a long history with mental illness, and it's just something that, you know, I bring to the table, as I think every member does. And, you know, we talk to each other about how lucky we've been to have the resources to deal with it, and we know that that others don't, that other families don't have the ability to pay for it themselves or push through the barriers that the insurance companies erect. And that's what I want to make sure, is that you don't have to be a relatively affluent, relatively well-educated family in order to access this mental health system.
But it seems like when states are in trouble, when the country's in trouble, money-wise, that's where we cut.
Yeah, it's the first.
Why do we do that?
You know, because we're penny wise and pound foolish, and I can't tell you why we cut mental health, but I think we don't believe that it'll catch up with us, and because we sort of see that there's this safety net. Now, unfortunately, that safety net is the emergency rooms and the prisons, and you know, those places are costing $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, when a small intervention up front would have saved us a lot of money. I'm hoping that my legislation will change that. We're putting a lot of money into building more inpatient beds for people that just need a place to be for a couple days or a couple weeks to get stabilized, where our bill would hire up a lot more psychologists and social workers
for kids in schools,
invest a lot more in early intervention, because what the data tells us is if you find a kid who's showing some early onset signs of serious mental illness, if you get to him just a year earlier, you can save that kid a lot of aggravation down the line and save the system a lot of money. If you're somebody in DC who works in mental health policy and have been doing it for 40 years, you will say that this is the most momentum that you've ever seen behind mental health reform, and I'm hopeful of that.
I'm hopeful as well. A new study just came out, Pew Research, that says basically Congress is ineffective. They're not getting the job done. Americans are saying, I could do a better job than you guys down there in Washington. What are we going to do to fix this broken system that we have,
Yeah.
because it's not coming together. What do we do? What's it going to take to sit across the table from one another and go, this makes sense, can we get this passed?
So, I mean, if you think it's frustrating from the outside, imagine being on the inside. I mean,
I heard
right?
that from somebody else.
I mean, no,
who's in your
it's
position.
maddening. No, it's maddening to go to work every day and feel like, what people show up for most days is the fight rather than the work to actually move the nation forward. And I don't know, I think about it through another prism. I mean, I've got 2 young kids at home, and I don't mean this in jest, actually. I mean it seriously. I don't want them to be embarrassed by the profession that their dad has chosen, right? I mean, I don't want being a politician to be the butt of jokes. And I think it's incumbent upon us to reach out across the aisle more, and so that's what I do on almost every major issue I work on, from mental health to supporting manufacturing to foreign policy. You know, I'm working with John McCain, with anybody who will work with me. But the system is also broken, right? And we've got to fix that. The way that we finance campaigns forces each side to run to their base, to the left and the right.
What happened to the caps? We just spend more and
spend more and more and more. They've been ruled unconstitutional. So the Supreme Court has basically taken all of the rules off of campaign financing. And so, unfortunately, the way you raise money is to sort of run to the left side or to run to the right side. The way that politics is covered today covers it as soap opera and sport, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You start to think that that's how the place actually works when it's covered that way.
Should we have more than 2 parties?
Listen, I don't think there'd be any harm in having more than 2 parties. I'm not sure that is the flaw, in that there were times when the 2 parties were working rather well together. I think the flaw is in the way that campaigns are funded, the way that politics is covered, and then in the House of Representatives, how districts are drawn. There are very few districts that have equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats. Members now are in safe Republican districts or safe Democratic districts. That's part of the fix to the problem, too.
You're going to stay in politics your whole life, you think?
No, I
You said that pretty quickly.
I did, because it's hard. I come back to the fact that I have a young family, and it's really hard to be away for the amount of time that I'm away. And I think I chose to do this at a young age, in part so that I could have a second and
We
third
should say
act
you're 42.
doing something else.
Okay.
I'm 42. I'm one of the youngest members, not the youngest any longer of the Senate. But no, I think I'm going to do this for as long as I think I'm being useful at it. There are a lot of other interesting things to do in the world other than this.
Predictions about all these terrorist groups that we have around, and we should say some of this is homegrown.
Yep.
How do we work on these disenfranchised people that are following these people? How do we get a hold of this?
So if you look at what has been the cause of this radicalization in places like France and Belgium, a lot of it is the lack of inclusion for the Muslim populations, right? There is just a lack of integration between the Muslim populations and then the Christian and non-Muslim populations. They go to separate schools, they live in separate neighborhoods, there's no institutions that they belong to. That's not the history of this country. This country is better than any country in the world at bringing people in from wherever they come from, of whatever faith tradition, and including them in the American experience. And I think that that's one of the most important things that we can do to try to make sure that America doesn't turn into the kind of place that it seems Brussels and Paris have turned into, to make sure that we do reach out to our Muslim populations, that we don't assume that mosques are a place of organized radical extremism, that we actually go to those places and understand their faith and understand their cultures and traditions. That's actually the best prophylactic against extremism, is inclusion and integration. And I think we have to remember what we're good at, and we have to look to the mistakes that other countries have made.
Religion has always been a problem until you go to a house of worship and you say, oh, that's not so much different than the house of worship I go to. Where do you come down on the side of the Syrian refugees coming into this country? Many people are very afraid, right or wrong. How do we vet these people coming into our country?
So I understand why people are afraid. There's no way to watch what happened in Paris and not be afraid. It's no way to watch the kind of brutality that's happening inside Syria and not worry that eventually that's going to come to your shores. I think it's important to just get some of the facts out about the kind of refugees that come to the United States. We target the individuals who have been the victims of terror. So the people that are applying for refugee status in the United States effectively have to prove that they can't live in the refugee camps there because they have been brutalized themselves, or they are so vulnerable to attack that they need to come to the United States. And so 98% of the refugees that we brought in from Syria, for instance, are non-military age males, right? They're mainly women, kids, elderly, the frail, the sick. And by the way, they get a screening that's tougher than any other immigrant that comes to this country. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't tighten and make stronger that screening process.
I was going to say, is it tight enough?
It can be tighter, but it is the tightest that we have. And in part, it's tight because we know who these people are because we've screened them for 18 months to 2 years, and they largely have been in UN refugee facilities, so we've been watching them, we know who they are, and we bring them to the United States only because they're the worst of the worst in terms of the brutalization that they've experienced. And you know, that's who this country is. This country is one that was founded on the basis of fleeing persecution. We have had a history of bringing in those who have been the victims of terror and attacks. And I think that we are strong enough to both protect ourselves from terror and help rescue others from terror. Now, my contention is that by focusing just on Syrian and Iraqi refugees, you're actually missing the broader scope of the problem, which is that, you know, right now you can come to the United States with almost no screening from places like France and Belgium.
Yeah, citizens from 40 countries are allowed to travel to the U.S. without applying for a visa.
Right.
Again, could you get a hold of this one along with the federal law?
So this is where I think the most important reform is, because we know that the sophisticated cells that are plotting attacks against the West are really in countries in Europe. And right now, if you're a European citizen, you can come to the United States without a visa. And what I'm suggesting is tightening up that process and saying to these countries in Europe that you have to do a much better job of tracking these individuals and then putting their information onto the no-fly list if you want to continue to be part of this visa waiver program, their citizens not needing a visa to travel to the United States. We brought in 2,000 highly vetted refugees from Syria, victims of torture and terror. Every year, 20 million people come to the United States through the visa waiver program with a very light vet. Mm-hmm. So that's where I think the real win is in terms of protecting America.
Predictions for this country in the next 4 or 5 years. Where are we?
On this issue of...
You're in the Senate.
Yeah.
Where do you see this nation in 4 or 5 years? Are we moving ahead? Are we moving backwards?
Well, listen, I think there's a really positive story to tell about this country, and I hate that people seem, so negative about the trajectory of America, because if you look at the statistics in terms of the growth of this economy, the reduction of unemployment rates compared to what other countries are going through, we're in much better economic shape. This revolution of energy independence, where gas prices yesterday, as I traveled down the street,
they're down for a change,
are under $2 a gallon in some places, and then the strength of our workforce as every other country gets older and older and older. The United States actually stays a pretty young country because of our history of immigration. Economically, we're really poised to leapfrog the rest of the world when it comes to the global recovery, and that doesn't mean we don't have a lot of work still to do, but it means that the greatness of this country is still to come. And I guess, I don't know, if you're in my business, you have to show up with a glass half full attitude every day, but there's a lot of things to fix, but there's a lot of things that are good about the trajectory of this country as well.
In the U.S. Senate, you've been there since 2012. What are you most worried about?
Well, I'm worried about this hyper-partisanship, the fact that it seems that most people show up every day trying to score points against the other side, and Is that
because there's a 24/7 news cycle?
I think some of it is that the belief is that you get on the news by attacking rather than by compromising, and that actually is true, unfortunately. I think some of it is this play to the base in order to raise money. And then there's some people that just don't believe that their job description involves compromise, that they're somehow showing political weakness to reach out across the aisle. So I that's what worries me, is that this partisanship will continue. And I'm I'm a Democrat and I've got convictions, but I actually see that part of my job description is to compromise when the moment, is right.
Since 2008, 2009, when the bottom fell out of the economy, a lot of jobs have come back, but they've been part-time jobs.
That's right.
They haven't been, for the full picture, great jobs. And though we see statistics that say, oh, things are back to normal. If you talk to your friends and neighbors, they will tell you they're still afraid.
Absolutely right.
They're very afraid. What do we do about greed in this society, in this country, where the 1% seem to have a lot?
Yeah.
What do we do to make people secure? Now they're afraid because of the terrorism around the globe.
Right.
Money's tight.
Yeah.
How do we fix that? How do we bring a consensus together?
Right. The anxiety from the Great Recession hasn't left.
No.
And that growth in the economy seems to have occurred only at the very top. And although people are technically back working, they're working for less money than they used to, and their expenses are higher than ever. And so the squeeze that people feel.
Don't get me started on the taxes in the state of Connecticut.
So you got taxes, you have college expenses, you have to save for retirement, right? I mean, everything is just toppling down on top of families. And so here's where I think the win can be. So this country's greatness ultimately is going to be tied to the education of our workforce, and your real ability to continue to advance and earn more money is attached to your ability to continue to get educated. That's getting further and further out of reach for a lot of families. And so if I think about how we can shrink the gap between the very rich and everybody else, I think about education. I think about getting more people through college quicker. I think about getting more people access to advanced degrees. I think about getting more people into the fields where we know there's going to be job growth, like engineering and science and math. And so if it was up to me, if I was the king of the world, I would just devote tons of new resources into helping people get advanced degrees, helping people get more relevant higher education, reducing the amount of borrowing that kids and their families have to do. I think if you did that, you would start to shrink this gap between the rich and the poor. Now listen, I'd ask for the very rich to help pay for that because I think ultimately that benefits them as well. More people having more income, buying the products that the very rich are making or investing in. So I do think that you can ask the very wealthy to help pay for that educational investment, but I think that that's probably the most important thing you can do.
How do you keep companies in the state of Connecticut? They talk about leaving. You've got, Pfizer, which is based in New York, is going to merge with Allergan and go to Ireland. That's a tax issue. How do we get commerce to stay in the state of Connecticut?
So, I sort of think about it from my viewpoint, right? I don't have a vote on tax rates in Hartford, but I do have a vote on the kind of assets that cause companies to come to Connecticut. So why do you come to Connecticut? Despite the fact that you're gonna have a higher tax rate and you're gonna have a higher cost of living. You come here because of the proximity to New York and Boston. You like that. You like the quality of our schools. You like that. And you like the quality of our workforce. We've got a lot of highly trained people here. Well, a lot of that's because of federal investments. A lot of that is because of transportation money. A lot of that is because of support for higher education or support for research and investment. So I'm just trying to make the argument to my colleagues that we should be putting more money into fixing our roads and our bridges, more money into schools, more money into research and development. And if you do that, it'll disproportionately benefit Connecticut. And it'll benefit Connecticut because if you fix Metro North and make the commute from Bridgeport to New York 15 minutes shorter, or you allow for Yale to open up a brand new wing to do translatable research and development into the private sector, that will bring more companies here. So, I just try to control the things I can control, and a lot of that is federal investment into our strengths.
In your time in the Senate, what will you feel really good about if you got that thing done? What is it?
Well, right now it's this mental health bill. Come back to where we were talking about earlier. I just, especially in the wake of, Sandy Hook, my life changed in December of 2012. Everybody's life changed, right? But
coming up on the third anniversary.
Coming up on the third anniversary, being there in that firehouse that day, having gotten to know the families, many of them very well since then, I feel like I will have failed as their representative if I can't move the needle in some way, shape, or form on policies that are going to make sure that another Sandy Hook doesn't happen somewhere else. And that could be on gun laws, that could be on mental health, but I wake up every day in fear that I'll fail those families and I'll fail that community. And I don't know, I've never been emotionally detached from the issues that I work on, but I'm more psychologically wrapped up in this issue of mental health reform and gun violence than I have been in anything. That's what I need to do.
Senator Chris Murphy, thanks very much. We're going to check back with you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks
Ann.
for your time.
Thanks.
Spend one this in. Who is this girl? Spend all night kissing, and if was right here, then who else is missing? Got a little sidetracked, if I'm as a wish, and found the keys to the door, but it's also a metaphor. Things keep locked in the grocery store, but mine just to save time.